All right, welcome to part 3 of my 3D trailer title series. Today we're going to be doing the post-processing in After Effects. So let's get into it. All right, so I am in After Effects now, and I have an empty file, and we're going to start by importing our footage. Now, when I'm working with an Unreal Engine project, I will typically do 3 quick renders just to make sure. So the first I will do is a JPEG render just as my base starting point. And let me be very clear. A lot of the time, a JPEG render, assuming you are doing nothing to the color grade and you're just working with the footage just straight out of the box, it will look very good. So if I play this back, it looks not bad. It looks very close to what the Unreal Engine viewport had. There is a slight color shift because it is a video game engine. It does have a very wide color space, but the thing about working with Unreal Engine is I'm assuming you have to try and make something fast, and you might be a run and gun filmmaker, so doing something quick, not quite as perfect, working in the best color space is not always necessary. JPEG renders can be good, but I do recommend using EXRs when you have the time. So let's import those EXRs now. So I have my pre-renders folder. I will hit Control I, render, pre-renders, pull up my ACEs. And if you watch the previous tutorial, you will know that I rendered the file in an ACES color space. So if I import this and I rename my files just so I know which one I am working with. So I call this JPEG. Now I'll call the top one ACES. And I will drag the ACES into my timeline. Now, definitely looks wrong. There's something weird happening with the color grade. So what we're going to do is right click on our ACES footage in our storage bin and go to interpret footage main. We're going to set this to our desired frame rate 30, and then color management, we're going to preserve RGB. So we're going to basically turn off all of the color management of this image. Now it's going to look way worse. Now, before I go any further, I should mention one other thing, and that is your project settings in After Effects. So you're going to go to your 32BPC down here. Make sure that your working space is set to none, and you blend colors using a 1.0 gamma. Check out this video on ACES if you want to learn more about this process, but this is what I recommend if you're doing some Unreal stuff, especially working in ACES. Now, referring back to that tutorial, because this footage does look gross, we have to add a couple of other effects. So the first one is going to be an open color IO. So we'll go to our effects and presets in the top right hand corner and we'll search up open color IO, drag that on, and we're going to find our config file. Now if you are not rendering in the ACES color space, we are going to use the JPEG render, but let's assume that you are. So we'll find that config file, set our input space to ACES CG, and our output space to output Rec 709. And now we can see it looks much, much closer to our render that we had in Unreal Engine. Now, if I turn off the top layer in ACES and look at the JPEG, we can see, one, there's a little bit of a pop in the timing, and that's because I did not change the frame rate of the JPEG to 30. So just make sure those match. And now, if I turn the eye on and off, we can see that there's a little bit of a shift in the JPEG and the EXR version. Now, what I'm attributing this to, and this is purely speculation, but the ACES color space and the ACES working space are much wider in their color availability. So if you look at the histogram and the lumetri scopes in the lower right hand corner, you can see that when we have just the JPEG, the values come down a little bit more. It's as if there's more contrast to the image. We can see that just in general when I turn on the ACES, there's more detail in the shadows. So this is one of those situations where I do recommend working in ACES if you can warrant the pipeline and you want to do some extra color grading after the fact. So with that in mind, at this point, we could render it. But I want to bring this to the next level. Now, in the original trailer that I did, I added some smoke and lens flares. I added some smoke and some sparks to give it a little bit more life. We're going to do that in After Effects. Now, to be fully transparent, I did do a lot of that in Unreal, and we'll talk about that in another tutorial because it does make it very long. But how would you process this in After Effects to add some of those extra fun details? Well, we could add some smoke. So to do that, in my project folder, I have some smoke, and if you are looking for smoke assets, I highly recommend Motion Array. I am not affiliated with them at all, but I do use them on the reg. So I have this little smoke effect, and very easily what I could do is I could set the mode to screen, and now we have some smoke in the scene. It's not quite composited in though, and that's because if we just play this back, I'll set this to quarter just so that we are viewing our scene a little bit more fast for you guys. We can see that it looks okay. It doesn't quite really integrate into the scene though. There's something off about it. So the reason why is because it's not a 3D layer. So we could set this a 3D layer and we could track our footage. But the reason why I'm excited to show you the After Effects workflow is that in Cinema 4D, there's some really cool tools to get this camera animation into After Effects. Now, in Cinema 4D, there's a very convenient tool where we can save the camera information and bring that directly into After Effects. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to click on the upper right-hand corner, our render settings, and there's a couple things you have to do to get this set up. First, you have to go to your output and make sure that your frame range is set to all frames. However long your animation is, you want to make sure that your camera animation is within those frames. Next, you have to go to your save, and you have to set some folder directory. We are not going to be rendering out of Cinema 4D, but you need to at least tell Cinema that it is going to render to a folder. Not going to use it though. Instead, you're going to go to this Compositing Project File tab right here. This is where you get the After Effects camera information. So by default, all of these settings will be unchecked. Make sure that you check everything so you see the blue check marks, and then you save your AEC file somewhere where you can find it. So in my pre-renders folder here, I'm saving this in an AECs folder. Just find a way to stay organized. It'll help you in the long run when you're searching for stuff. So you can make sure that folder is set and click Save Project File. Save this in that same AECs folder that we were just at. Let's just overwrite that just for the sake of this tutorial. And what we can do now is jump over to After Effects. So now we're back in After Effects and I'm ready to bring in that 3D file that we just made in Cinema 4D. So we'll hit Control I on our keyboard and we will find that AEC file, and we'll just double click on it and we can see that it's going to make a new folder in our bin. So we're going to double click on that new composition that was just made, and we can see that something's wrong. We're definitely missing some footage. Now, what After Effects is looking for is the Cinema 4D render. However, we didn't render out of Cinema 4D, we rendered out of Unreal, and After Effects doesn't know that. So basically, what we need to do is just copy this camera from this composition into our working composition. So we can just select the camera, Control C, then we'll go to our footage or our trailer title and hit Control V. And very conveniently, the camera length is actually timed out to the length of our footage in our timeline. So how do we know if it worked? My best recommendation is, first off, double click on your text tool and we'll type test footage. Just something so that you can make this text a 3D layer. We can see it went away if we click on the 3D button. But the problem with the Cinema 4D camera tool is that it uses a world origin of 0, 0, versus in After Effects, the world origin is based on the size of your composition. Basically, what I'm trying to say is any footage that you want to composite with a Cinema 4D camera, you have to set the position to 0, 0 as the base. And now we can see that our text is in the scene, and unfortunately it's a little big. That's another downside about working with the Cinema 4D camera, so we have to change our font size to something smaller. Now, I'm going to put this directly into the center, and I'm going to solo it. And if I play this back, we can see this matches our camera animation really nicely. And if I unsolo that and play it back, that looks good. We have our camera information in After Effects, and that's super cool because now we can start adding some fun effects. So the first one I'm going to do is I'm going to add some smoke. Now I have these other smoke assets inside my bin. You can go to places like Motion Array or Envato to find some of this stuff. You can even find some stuff around for free. You just kind of have to look around, or you could add some built-in particles. What we're going to do for this tutorial is just add in this ground fog. So I'm going to drag this into my composition, and we can see now that everything turned black. That's not right. But what we can do is rename this fog layer to fog so we can stay organized. Then we're going to set the mode to screen. And that's basically going to get rid of all of the black in our scene. And if we set this now to a 3D layer, this will match our composition. Now, as I said, because the world origin by default in After Effects is different than Cinema 4D, we have to make sure that we set the position of any footage to 0, 0, and then we have to scale it down typically to about 25%. And we can see now, if we play this back, that fog is going to be much more integrated into the scene. Now, what about other effects we could add? Well, of course, fire is one of those things that brings logos a little bit more life, so of course we're going to add some fire. So next in my bin, I am going to find some fire that I have. I highly recommend using Production Crate online. They have a ton of great assets online, and very conveniently, this fire is looped, so I can right-click on it, interpret footage, main, and set the loop to 5 times, just so I know that it's going to last the entire duration of my shot. Now, again, this isn't integrated, so what we're going to do is we're going to hit the 3D button. We're going to go to our position and set this to 0, 0 and scale it down by 25%. Now, definitely looks a little bit more intense. What I want to do is make this a little bit more subtle. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to hit save on our keyboard, and then we're going to scale up this fire just a little bit, and we're going to bring down the opacity by maybe 80%, so it's now at 20%, so it's really subtle, and we're just getting those little kisses of fire at the bottom. Now, before I render this, I want to make sure I do any final color grading tweaks that I would want to bring this a little bit more to life. So as I said, I wanted to work with the ACES color space, but we could just swap over to the JPEG version and it will look just fine. Again, JPEGs are not a bad thing if you were just going to use this as your base default settings. So next, what I want to do is make sure I turn on my ACES footage, and I'm actually going to Control X to copy that effect and put it onto an adjustment layer. And I'll rename this adjustment layer ACES to Rec 709, and I will paste that onto the adjustment layer. And then I'm going to hit Control Alt Y again and make a effects button just above the ACES footage, but below the ACES CG footage. And this is where I'm going to add all of my final finishing touches to the overall look. So first, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a Lumetri color, and I'm going to add just a touch more contrast, bring this a little bit more contrast. If I push this way too much, it looks gross, so just a touch, brighten up those highlights. After we do our curves, next I want to go to my correction and make sure that my exposure looks good. I'm actually going to bring up the exposure just a touch, but not too much. I don't want to wash it out. to like 0.3 and then bring up those highlights and maybe the shadows just a little bit. Just adding a little bit of color correction. Then what we're going to do is we are going to add a few more effects to bring a little bit more life. So the first is we're going to add a noise. And you could use something a little bit more intense like an add grain or even some noise plugins. But I'm going to be honest, most of the time that dramatically increases the render time, and a noise will look really, really good. So pick your poison. 5% is still a little too strong for me, so I'm going to set that to 2. And then I'm going to add a vignette. And that vignette is just going to bring a little bit more attention to the logo overall. Now, I understand I'm skipping a lot of extra steps when it comes to the perfect workflow with compositing footage in a correct color space and making sure that everything matches nicely and picking the best elements. For the sake of this tutorial, doing something so perfect can take a very long time. My goal behind this video is I hope you learn the value of getting the correct camera animation from Cinema 4D into After Effects so you can add your compositing elements yourself and make it integrate well with the scene. So at this point, we're finally ready to render. So what we're going to do is we're going to hit Control M on our keyboard, and from a motion graphics standpoint for something like this, let's say you're going to be editing it in DaVinci Resolve or Adobe Premiere, you're going to set your settings, and this is an intermediate render, so I'm going to recommend using the QuickTime format. And then your format options, make sure that you set the Apple ProRes 422 or animation. One of these two will be perfectly fine for what you need. So you can click OK on your output settings once you've determined the QuickTime format. Then you can set your output directory. I'm just going to put this in my pre-renders folder, and then you can hit the render button and bring it into DaVinci Resolve or Adobe Premiere and make your trailer. Now, I hope this video was useful. I know I covered a lot. Really, we're trying to marry 3 different pieces of software, and it can take some know-how, and I hope this tutorial helped you get to that know-how. Let me know if you learned something in the comments, or if you have any questions. Comment section is down there for that as well. Hit that subscribe button to join the party and learn more about motion graphics things from me. And hit that like button. In fact, smash that like button with the nearest heavy object that you have. It helps me and the algorithm grow. So that's a nice thing. And I will leave you with the final tip, and that is to eat 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight, and you'll make some gains. Goodbye, my friends. Bye.